Welcome, everybody. We are happy to continue to provide these updates along with our friends at Context. As Patrick just said, I think there is close to anybody in the market in terms of having a view of what's happening, not only what happened, but why it happened. And today's call is going to be what we think will happen, which is really important. Before we get to Adam, I've got two things I want to just kind of mention. The first is we just finished our North America Summit meeting in San Diego 2 weeks ago. And at that meeting, we released a economic impact guide. And essentially what this guide does is it really digs into a number of the cost elements associated with going to market and talks about how distributors can mitigate those costs and also provide risk deferments. So it's a really good report. Many of the vendors have asked us to do it. We had released one years ago, and now this one is an update to that with a reflection of what's happened in the marketplace, certainly with, software and SaaS and subscription, as opposed to just hardware. So I would encourage you to go to our Knowledge Hub to take a look at that. I think, certainly the vendors in the distributors know all of this, but the vendors on our call would, I think, benefit from it. Second item is I just want to mention that we have our GTDC EMEA Summit coming up June 13th, 14th in Amsterdam. We're really looking forward to that. Registration is open for it. So for those of you that can attend, you can now register. And, there'll be much more to follow in terms of the details with, agendas and meetings, et cetera. But just wanted to make sure everybody kind of had that one on their radar screen. Okay. So with that, Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Frank. It's great to be back again. So I'm going to present our outlook for 2023, which is based on our own data, but also with very big support from the channel. So we do a number of forecast research sessions where we bring together the channel. So we have vendors, distributors, and resellers together. And this is just, I did actually show this at the 18th of January, the last time we had a presentation, but we did actually come in at 2.5% against our 3.2%, which was excluding telecoms. Telecoms is really hard to predict because the main reason being channel shift, but we're also seeing huge increases at the moment, which are not to do with channel shift. So when I present the numbers today, I will actually show you one example of how important telecoms is in the overall understanding of the numbers. But now we're not focused on 2022, we're thinking about 2023. And so I'm just going to take you through some of the big opportunities which are impacting the channel in 2023. The main one, which is huge and which we heard about a lot at the GTDC Summit when we were listening to the presentation that was done by Crawford Del Prete in the IDC overview at the very beginning, is this drive to digitalize. And so it is the huge opportunity. It's what's really driving so much change in the market. And it's all about security, efficiency, competitiveness. The world has changed since COVID, and it's been accelerated, I think. And there are new use cases coming through, and we're seeing the growth of software, and we're seeing the catch up of infrastructure as well. And one of the big unknowns is how much the working from home is going to be part of this drive to digitalization. But it's very, very clear this is the big change. And so I think that we're looking short term at 2023. The results of 2023 will be impacted by all sorts of, let's say, timing issues such as inventory and demand in terms of how it's impacted by things like the war and the economy. But the overall driver, the overall direction is to digitalization. So I think that, if we were looking at a 5-year forecast, we'd be saying that there's, a lot of growth that we can imagine coming through the channel. The second one is public sector investment. So the countries which are benefiting most at the moment are Italy and Spain and Portugal. We have the jury out. I spoke yesterday to our Polish country manager who said he sees absolutely no sign. I thought with Joe Biden going to visit, maybe there'd be a little step in the direction of finding a compromise. Obviously, Joe Biden it was incredibly popular, him being there. And there's a bit of a clash of values at the moment between what the Polish government want and what the EU wants. It would make a big difference if that money did come through, but at the moment, I don't think it is going to. Same thing with the German education budget. So we haven't factored either of these two into the forecast for 2023. We know that the budget is huge, 6.5 billion, 5 originally, another 1.5 added to it. And we know that we're just not seeing that come through the channel, and it's not going direct. So in effect, there's a big question over the slowness of the take-up of that budget, but that can have a big, big impact on the channel. And then one of the ones which we've highlighted is the Spanish elections, which we think are going to mean added investment as a result of those elections. That's a big factor. The next one is product refresh cycles. So we have the COVID surge, which increased the installed base, probably advancing some demand, but also creating new customers back in 2020 and 21. The refresh cycle will be coming through. Most people's view is it will not come through in 2023, potentially towards the end of the year. ESG is a really interesting one. We discussed this in some detail. And one of the moments when this came alight to me was when we had the networking discussion. And somebody said, if the EU brought in laws about energy consumption on certain items of infrastructure, that could be an absolute game changer. We know that when those types of legislative changes take place, it can have a really, really positive impact. Anyone who's looking at the car industry will be thinking about how on earth we're going to get to the point where no new motor vehicles that are not electric are coming into the market in, I think it's in 7 or 8 years' time in the UK. So it's that type of change, which at the moment we're not factoring in 2023, but which is one of those underlying positive factors that we need to keep an eye out for. And then, of course, there's new products as well. We don't think that Windows 11 is going to impact this year, but certainly may do by the end of the year, and next year we think it will make an impact. So that's the product refresh cycles. The last one is, again, we have taken a steady state view of the economy, which is that kind of what we're seeing now is what we're going to get. I think that our first half of the year is more muted, and you'll see that the numbers grow in the second half of the year. It's quite evident that if there was a positive outcome in negotiations over Ukraine, for example, there would be a peace dividend. But most people feel that they're dug in for a long time. Having said that, who knows what happens in terms of diplomacy. It may be that towards the end of the year, we do get a bit of a dividend on that. Let's hope so. Then China reintegrating into global commerce. That's a move which has happened very much in the end of 2022, 2023. Sorry, apologies. That's me. Yeah, so we can see some things happening, changing there in China. Some things not necessarily for the positive in terms of the COVID crisis there. So there's a little overview of positive impacts on the channel and the key risks. Well, the one which keeps me up at night and probably keeps a lot of you up at night is this whole question of project slowdown or cancellation. You know, I can only base it on anecdotes, but I heard some pretty concerning anecdotes, you know, about projects being put on hold or cancelled. And I think that this is a big unknown. And the big unknown is that we can be optimistic and we can say, you know what, the IT industry tends to outperform GDP, which is true. And we've seen that over a number of years in various different presentations and when you look at the data. But we're in a new, different world at the moment of uncertainty. So I have to say that if I had one thing that could potentially impact 2023 negatively, it's this one here, which is just that small companies want to hold on to their cash. Larger companies don't have people. We heard about one example where a big project was cancelled because they downsized and didn't have the people to actually, you know, do the job. So that's the big unknown for 2023. I don't think supply chain is the big issue this year. It's probably the other way around. It's excess product, which is more the issue than lack of product. When we came into 2022, it was definitely the other way around. We've seen unbelievable, you know, lengthy times given for the delivery of certain products, which are getting better. There's also been some clever engineering done by some of the vendors of enterprise goods, where simplifying the silicon that goes into them so that they could get stuff out. We saw a big boost happening for that in the middle of 2022. So people are kind of looking at ways around the supply chain issues. But as I say, it's unlikely to be shortage, which is the big issue. It's more likely to be excess product, which is impacting prices, and where the motivation to bring in new products is down until the old stock is actually cleared through the system. So that's definitely a big weight on the system. Patrick was saying that at the very beginning when we were just chatting before the call started. One which is, it's more going to impact individual companies than the overall market, but there is this lack of skills and the tight labor market. We are seeing shortages, the famous Great Resignation, the post-COVID moves, trying to find ways to keep people on board. You know, it's really quite interesting to see how social attitudes have changed as a result of COVID. And so, you know, adapting and making sure that companies can actually motivate and keep people is one of the key things. And then lastly, when you look at some of the compares, you know, when you take notebooks with its 28% growth in 2020, and then it's slowed down in 21, and it went into negative territory in 2022. If you compare that against the 2019 numbers, it's still in positive territory. It may not be by the end of 2023, because we're kind of looking at it with a lot of interest, because I think as we are, it's still a net positive, and it's a net positive in terms of timing, because the equipment is out there earlier in the market, therefore the refresh cycle is there. But yeah, the question is, will there be this extra demand? And of course, at the beginning of this crisis, there was that inspirational moment when the head of Lenovo said 1 PC per person, not 1 PC per household. I don't think we're seeing that materialize. And I think that was something which was aspirational, but I don't think that is actually going to happen. So the compares are tough. They're going to be tough for LFD this year. Monitors, it's going to be really, really tough after being such a strong product in 2021 and 2022, and then suddenly crashing in Q4 2022. And we can see from the start of 2023 that, you know, that category is really suffering. So let's move now into the numbers. And just before I do that, a couple of assumptions that are important. You will see that later on, that we have forecast, our analysts have forecast in an optimistic and a pessimistic case Our forecasting report explains what underlies those two optimistic and pessimistic cases. We've taken the midpoint for the forecast. We use a fixed rate exchange. We have all countries in there except for Russia, which is the same as previous quarters. And as I say, it's a kind of steady state that we're looking at. So we're looking at sustained but muted growth in 2023. We are looking at growth of at around about 2%. And if you look at the optimistic, we set it at 5%, and the pessimistic is minus 1.5%. So 2% sits pretty much in the center of that. And it's all about value. The growth side of it is all about value. So this is full year 2022, where we saw 14% growth in value, which is mainly software and infrastructure, and -4% in volume. And what we're looking at in 2023 is 8% on value and -2% on volume. So volume is beginning to catch up. The comparatives become a lot easier. And so if you look at it on a quarterly basis, you can see that the value growth that we anticipate comes down in the second half, and the volume growth goes up in the second half. And that's how we get to those overall year numbers. We see the value business starting off the year with a lot of strength, a lot of backlog. We asked you the question at the last GTDC meeting. The question was, is your backlog filling up as fast as it was before? The answer to that was no. So that was just a sample of people at the last GTDC call. What I'm hearing from people in the first few weeks of 2023 is that orders are slow on the value side. So that means that there's still plenty of backlog, which is going to keep the first half going. But the question is, what will there be when we get to the second half of the year? I'm now just going to show you an overview by what we call top sector. And before I do that, I just want to remind you what the top sector is. So we've got 5 sectors: infrastructure, personal systems, peripherals, software and services, and telecoms. And we've put our context industry sectors into those top sectors. And we did this about 6 months ago because we decided that it's much better if you can talk about the big movements in the channel at a top level. And then obviously, for those who want to go down to a lower level of detail, they can. But here we are. So this is the growth, and now looking at it year on year, the different years going from 2020 up to 2023. This is the comparative. So if you look here, you've got infrastructure went down by a percentage point in 2020 and has been growing at around about 5 or 6%, and we're forecasting 5%. So that is a mix of, let's just go back and remind you, storage, servers, networking, which will be growing, LFD will be flat, computing components will be a little bit negative, power equipment will be positive. So you see it's a bit of a mix that, but that's how we get to that infrastructure number. Here's personal systems, which is desktop and mobile computing, the huge growth of both those categories in 2020. And we're looking at a negative growth of -5% in 2023. If you look at peripherals, you can see, again, very similar story. The big growth in the COVID times, and then we're looking at flat to negative growth in 2023 for peripherals. Some positives, printing is overall positive, but you take things like consumables, monitors are going to be in the negative territory. Now we come to the star, which is software and services, which is, we predict, going to grow. When I show you the country by country, you'll see that, you know, we are potentially a little bit undercalling software. It could actually do better than we're saying. Don't forget the software and services includes both. So software is like a 10 to 15% growth, whereas services in Europe is only around about between 2 to 4% growth. So that's what brings down the overall percentage. But software is growing, last year it grew at 14%. okay? And telecoms is a bit of a joker. We've put it in at 3%. It's growing at 35% in the first 6 weeks of the quarter. So, you know, when you look at the numbers with and without telecoms, you're looking at a very, very different type of picture. So last time when we met in January, you voted like overwhelmingly that software would be the biggest growing category. So we agree with that. And we also asked you the question, which channel will grow the fastest in 2023? I think the answer to this is going to be the answer is going to be given by the reaction to the economic situation. And so let's have a look and see what the first 6 weeks have been like. So this is with telecoms, and we're looking at minus 1.4% growth in the first 6 weeks of the quarter. And the retail chain's grown by 3.5%, and that's entirely driven by telecoms, okay? And small and medium resellers are flat, and corporate resellers minus 2.9. Now, when you look at it without telecoms, you see this really interesting thing, which is in fact corporate reseller edging ahead there by 200 basis points. So a very small amount, minus 2.6 compared to minus 2.8. But you can see they've edged ahead there in the first 6 weeks of the year. So it's early days. We're certainly not calling anything on the basis of just 6 weeks of performance. But if you look, this is the underlying business, and we're seeing corporate resellers growing a little bit more. And then in terms of your forecast for the channel, you said in majority went for 3 to 5%. So we're a bit more cautious, although our optimistic scenario would take us up to 5%. Not many people thought above 5%. And then we asked what growth you saw for the channel in Q1, and most of you said 0%. Okay, some of you were a bit more negative, and it's pretty much a normal distribution there. When you look at our growth forecast by quarter, you can see that we believe it's going to be a flat quarter. Steady growth, from 0 to 1 to 2 to 4. And then you can see what it looks like when we look at it by top sector. You can see the declining growth in infrastructure, and Q3 was very, very strong in 2022. You can see the personal systems recovering, but starting at minus 11. Well, at the moment, mobile computing is minus 30%. So it's a really, really poor start to the year on mobile computing. So, you know, when you look at it, now again, this is just the beginning of the year, but it's a really poor start. So you can see why we've got a pretty negative start on the personal systems side. Peripherals, negative, going to positive. Software, pretty much consistent throughout the year, and we've kept telecoms pretty flat. When you look at it on a country by country basis, what you've got here, these are the years 2020, 2021, and 2022. So these are actuals. And if I add now the 2023, that's the dark blue I've just added there, you can see where we are. So most of the countries between 1 to 5%, the highest growing area is the Nordics. That's driven by the value business, which has been extremely strong. You can see an interesting trend here in Poland, where we're seeing that the growth, which has been surprising us all the way along, is now really starting to slow down. We've seen that at the beginning of 2023. The strongest country of the big five is Spain. France is doing pretty well, started off the year well. You can see the others, just marginal growth expected in 2023. I'm now going to just show you what it looks like when you actually match this is in the forecast, when you match the top sector to the industry sector. But first of all, just to give you an idea about the relative sizes of each of the sectors. So if you can see the first column, you can see that this is what makes up the total channel in Europe. sorry, let's go back there, right. 20% of revenues in 2022 infrastructure, 23% personal systems, 25 peripherals, 20 software, and the only one which is smaller, but which we break out because of its variability, is telecoms. And so this is the forecast, which I'd shown you already, adding up to the 2%. And this is how we equate it across to the actual industry sectors, which you can find in our data, particularly the distributors who have the access to what we call management reports, which has the totality of what is going on in the market. And vendors who have access to our data will see just their section of the market, okay? But they get more detail. So here you can see that our midpoint is for storage 6, servers 9, etc. Interesting discussions I had at the GTDC with various people about networking, and I think people all feel confident that the wireless networking is going to continue big growth. Networking switch is going to be a bit slower. So you can see here the growth by industry sector, and here is the optimistic and the pessimistic. So this will give you an idea of the sort of range we're talking about. In most cases, we're talking about 3% up or down, and that adds up to the total of +5 or -1.5, which is the figure I gave you earlier. I have presented just the midpoint in one presentation, and people said, oh, that looks quite optimistic. So it's important for people to realize that we have got a range of outcomes which we foresee. And now I'm just going to end off today's presentation with a look by country. So what I've got here is by top sector, comparing 2023 with 2022 in 8 different pictures. So we've got the big 5, we've got Poland, we've got the Nordics, and we've got rest of Europe. So on this page, we can see Germany, UK, Italy, and France. So one thing to say, all countries except Poland are negative for personal systems, mobile and desktop computing. Let's talk about Germany. While the mood in Germany is negative, the performance and expectations of the IT distribution channel remain actually quite positive. When I confronted this forecast with someone quite senior in the channel in Germany, he said that he thought we were being a bit pessimistic with the level that we were giving to Germany. And you know what? Germany has had 2 bad years. So maybe there is a little bit of upside there, but it's also the country which is the most impacted by the Ukraine war and has been the most, it's impacted morale, it's impacted business much more than other countries. And growth in software and infrastructure is lagging at the moment other countries, but there may be a catch up in 2023 to more historic rates of growth. The UK is sustained by the value side of the business, software and infrastructure, and steady sales of volume products. The future is not without risk as business confidence has been declining, inflation has been increasing, that started to go down, and there was a maverick forecast yesterday that said it would be 2% by the end of the year, but I don't think it's going to come down quite so quickly as that. And of course, the rise of interest rates. Italy is much more exposed to consumer than other countries. So the retail chain is the second most important channel after small and medium-sized resellers. And consumer channels represent 35% of the total compared to 26% in the other big 5 countries. This is therefore the cause for the flat performance which we're seeing in Italy, because although we're seeing big growth in the software and services and also in the infrastructure, there's also a big weight of the comparatives on the volume business, which is bringing down the overall numbers in Italy. France starts off the year performing well, It's the least exposed of the big 5 countries to the consumer channels, with only 22% of its business passing this way. Growth is going to be driven by infrastructure and software, and the outlook is looking positive. If we just have a look here, we can see that the 2 countries where the biggest software growth is going to take place in our forecast is Italy and France. We can see that's also where the highest level of infrastructure growth is. If you look here at what's inside the red box, you see why overall the growth in Italy is only very marginal in 2023. Now we move on to the next countries, which is Spain, Poland, Nordics, and rest of Europe. Sorry, I didn't change the top title. So Spain is the fastest growing of the big 5 countries. Other than personal systems, all sectors are forecast to grow, and this is driven by the value business. In Q4, we saw the long and sustained growth in Poland slow down. There is still huge potential in this country due to the strength of government tenders and the possibility of the EU funds coming in. But we see little advance in those negotiations, so hence our caution. The rest of Europe performed very strongly in 2022, and we foresee a slowdown in 2023, and the Nordics is forecast to grow strongly. Here you can see that in all 4 of these areas, software is forecast to grow strongly. You can see also that that's the same as far as infrastructure is concerned. And lastly, peripherals, the only 2 areas in Europe where peripherals are forecast to do reasonably is in Spain and in Poland, driven in Poland by displays, printing, and new technologies, and in Spain by the same, but also AV systems and accessories. So with that, I will finish. And of course, if anyone has any questions, I'm open to answer them, but I hope that's useful to give you an insight into the way that we're foreseeing things. Just so that you know, we do update the forecasts on a quarterly basis. I said this year, we're certainly not going to update the full year forecast until later on in the year. So we're going to stick with this because, you know, there are ups and downs. Last year, we felt in Q3 that after seeing this huge Q3 that we could actually change the annual forecast. If we'd stuck with our annual forecast back in Q3, we would have actually come even closer. So in any case, but yeah, and we do welcome people joining in our sessions. You should have received invites to join in our sessions to actually participate in the forecasting. So there we are. Does anyone have any questions at all?
Hi, Adam. This is Johan from Evertron.
Hello.
Hi. I see, or conclude maybe, that you completely walked away from the categorization we used for a long time. Giving you an example for LFD and normal monitors. You put them all on the peripherals, right?
So what we did is we put LFD, so in the top sector, put LFD in with infrastructure, and we put monitors in with peripherals. So for us, the LFD fits in much more closely to the infrastructure spend.
Okay, clear. Thank you. Yeah.
Good, good. Okay.
Adam, Stefan speaking here. On the services bucket that you were sharing, are you including and considering also as a service like, let me say, on consumption-based model kind of business, or is only services related to the technology?
So it's services related to technology. It's 2 things really. It's warranties that represents 1/3 of the total. And then it's the other services provided by distribution.
Good, thank you.
Yeah. And it's interesting, one of the questions, there's a higher growth rate in services in the US. So I did ask that question when I was over in the US. I asked Michael Urban, who is, as you know, someone who's European, but he's based in the US. And he said to me that in the US, because there's fewer resellers, the distributors do a lot more. That was his answer. So that's quite interesting, actually.
Good to know.
Yeah, well, because to be honest, when I think of all the emphasis which everyone is putting onto services, I would expect to see more growth there. Now, obviously, things like cloud services that you're providing, those revenues are going through software. So we are seeing the growth coming in that area there. And we looked at the growth there yesterday, and we're looking at 20% plus growth in those types of services through distribution.
Hey, Adam, it's Frank. On the chart that you had, and you could elaborate on this, infrastructure was, kind of growing pretty well through the first half, and then it seemed to decline. Can you elaborate on why you see that happening?
Yeah. So our view is that there's been a really big uptick in servers, in networking, and even to a certain extent in storage. We don't see that lasting into the second half of the year, not at the types of growth rates that we've seen since the Q3 2022. And the comparatives get a lot harder in Q3 2022. So if you combine those two things, which is A, the comparatives are a lot higher, and then B, we think that there's going to be a bit of a slowdown in terms of orders, that's why we have it slowing down in the second half of the year. We may well be wrong on that. I hope we are, because maybe there will be a surge coming through of more orders. But at the moment, that's the way that we see the year profiling.
Stephen here, thanks again for a great bit of insights and detail. ASPs, obviously you showed us the value numbers.
Yeah.
And the conversion from units to ASPs, about 5 percentage points lift on units. Is that the factor that you think will still work through 23? So if units are -10, value would be -5.
Yeah.
Could you comment on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there is still going to be a price factor in there. My sense is it's not going to be as generous as it has been in 2022. We were looking at 15% overall in hardware increases in prices, but I think your 5% is probably a lot closer to what it's going to be in 2023. So I think it's going, when we look at ASPs, it's going to be a mixture of increase in prices with discounting in order to move product through. So we saw that the first time we really saw that happen big time was with monitors, where up until Q3, the units were down, but the prices were up. And then in Q4, the thing crashed and the prices came down. And we know there's a lot of discounting to try and move those products through the channel. So I think there'll be more of that as well that will depress the prices.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'll hand it back to Kavita. So thank you very much for the questions. It really does, it's great.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was really great. I know that I can tell you that from the first time we sent out the invitation to this, we immediately got 30 to 40 registrations. So I know this is a topic everybody's eagerly waiting to hear a little bit more of your insight. All of our studies, all of our research is complimentary. It's all in our Knowledge Hub on the GTDC website. And I think Frank mentioned the European event. If anyone here is interested in learning more, that's also on our website. The registration is open, so feel free to share that internally with your teams as well. And we're here if you have any other questions. Thank you.